Okay. Welcome, all of you, to our lunch seminar series. And today we are very pleased to have Henrik Skaug Sætra with us. Henrik is an associate professor at the Department of Informatics with a broad and interdisciplinary background and approach, mainly focusing on political, ethical, and social implications of technology. He will talk about what happens to us as individuals and our societies when generative AI approaches or replicates human-level content, and what this means for the future of democracy. As usual, we will do a Q&A after the talk. So, welcome.
Thank you for the introduction. Being here at dScience is a great honor. I haven't been to one of these lunch talks before, so let's hope I kind of find an approximately right format for this. It will be a relatively informal talk about a research topic, not just one article, but an area of interest that I think I personally like working on, and that I've done several papers and articles and books on topics adjacent to the topic I'll be talking about today. The reason I was asked, I think, is that I did this article or interview with Apollon, the science communication magazine here at UVU, which had this title, Don't Trust Your Senses, which is why we got its title for this talk as well. Don't trust your senses, I say, but as you'll be hearing and listening to me today, you can trust me a little bit, hopefully. So trust some of your senses still, but let's see kind of how long we can continue to trust our senses. And what happens when AI systems get increasingly adept at challenging our ability to kind of distinguish what's real from what's fake, what's human from what's not. I've already been introduced, Associate Professor in Sustainable Digitalization, and I'm head of the Technology and Sustainable Futures Research Group at the Department of Informatics. So that's where I am usually, and I have, as I said, a very broad and interdisciplinary background and interest, which means this is also a good opportunity for me to see if there are other people here working on issues related to what we do. Then we'd be happy to connect and do things together. This is the latest issue of Apollon, and there you have this article. No one should no longer believe what they see or hear, which was the title the journalist gave me, which I play with and prolong today. So just a very quick grounding in some of the literature, some of the articles that you might find interesting if you think this topic and talk is interesting. If you don't find this talk interesting, you can go on and do something else. Otherwise, these are some potential sources that might be relevant for you. Some of the most obviously relevant stuff is stuff I've done with John Danaher from Ireland, related to what we call techno-moral change. What happens to morality? What happens to our moral norms and beliefs and practices once new technologies develop and become deployed and used in different ways? What happens to our moral concepts and the way we do things and think about things and think about each other? One is technology and moral change, where we talk about the transformation of truth and trust, which are two kind of obviously relevant concepts related to what I talk about today. Otherwise, we talk about moral change more broadly. In addition, you mentioned democracy at the end, which is what I'll also return to in the end. This is an article from Nature Machine Intelligence about avoiding diluting democracy by algorithms, which we think, me and Harald Borgebund from Østfold University College and Mark Kokelberg from the University of Vienna, where we discuss kind of the pitfalls and dangers related to increasingly thinking about democracy and political processes in computational terms, or using AI to kind of fix or improve politics and democracy. Generative AI, here to stay, I say, but for good. And that's pretty much one of the answers or questions I'll be asking today. And the final one, which some might find interesting if you think this is an interesting topic, is a new preprint called How Will Advanced AI Systems Impact Democracy? And this was just released as a preprint. But in it, you'll see very kind of a decent set of scholars from University of Oxford, but also Anthropic and OpenAI and these sorts of institutions, right? And Harvard and Yale, so this is a kind of a really fun set of scholars working with. And we have the University of Oslo there as well. So this is a preprint that might be interesting if you think these topics are interesting. If you think the kind of interlinkages between AI and democracy is interesting, this is a pretty good place to start, we hope. But enough about that. One of the key questions here then is real or fake? Don't trust your senses. How do we evaluate? How do we ascertain? How do we approach content and information and people and all these kinds of things we run into in our daily lives today. That has changed would be one of the main arguments here. 2015, Google Deep Dream was a system that could change and alter images, not really create them, and it wouldn't really fool you into thinking that this was something real yet, right? 2017, we were at this stage of image generation systems in a kind of artificial intelligence world. Pixel RNN, which we kind of occluded some of the picture, and it could kind of complete it in a sense. Not really convincingly, and not really in a way that would challenge our ability to say, oh, this is computer-generated, or this is something fake. 2019, 2 years ahead, we start approaching things that become more convincing to us, more interesting, more resembling things we might kind of come across from human creations as well, right? Butterflies, a hamburger, nature, a dog. Relatively low resolution still, but still kind of approaching something that's much more interesting and much more challenging in the sense of how can we determine what is computer generated or not. The same year, we had GPT-2, which was not a chat version of GPT, but something that would kind of complete your sentences and continue along a train of thought or continue along on a sentence, for example. Input: if you have severe breathing problems, you should get help immediately. You may not need hospitalization for respiratory problems, from which there is pain or even full internal combustion. Breathing is particularly hard. So this kind of very quickly turns into something quite absurd, but it was really impressive at the time, right? This was really kind of next step technology that could create text that resembled what humans actually created. But then you get in really different and kind of challenging and strange text and kind of pathways once this kind of proceeded them. Doping can be administered on your own. If you fall, you must be at least 1 kilometer away from you to be considered for the testing. There's kind of, it was challenging. It's not what we have today, right? So it's the same with images. 2022, jump ahead, and this was really, really cool at the time as well. And it's kind of, do you remember when DALL-E came and we got this sort of kind of quality level text-to-image technology? It was quite impressive then, right? You could create really cool stuff, but it was obviously still computer-generated. It was still quite obvious to us that this wasn't really something that a human had produced. I would not be fooled by what came out of DALL-E, the first versions. But then we get to 2024, right? So this is one of the kind of later models of Midjourney. It starts becoming a bit more challenging for us to say, oh, this is obviously fake, right? And tests now show that kind of when you have an AI-generated human and a real human, people really, really struggle with telling them apart with the best systems and people that are kind of adept at using these systems. So we are now at the point where images are clearly not something we can immediately and obviously tell is fake, which is challenging, right? Because we used to be able to immediately see this is fake, this is not, apart from, of course, image editing technologies that we had before, for example. But at scale, and the potential of these technologies is much broader than what we had with Photoshop, for example. So yes, it's not a totally new problem, but it's much larger. One of the articles I referred to was generative AI, here to stay, but for good. Here I talk about the impact of these sorts of systems, generative AI systems across modalities, not just images, but also text and audio and video, which I'll return to later on, which I talk about and argue in this article that it has impact on the micro level, individuals, cognitive atrophy, for example. Do we become less adept at producing text once we don't do it anymore, once we outsource more and more of our cognitive work to these algorithms? Persuasion and manipulation, lots of interesting study about how GPT, for example, ChatGPT can be quite persuasive if used the right way, and what it does to human relationships. The meso level, change power relations, employer-employee, for example, when these systems can kind of be used to replace humans. Extraction and exploitation, all of these systems creating images are trained on human creators' images, right? So there is this aspect of it as well. And bias and discrimination in the systems. We also have the politics and democracy, labor markets, and environmental costs, which I'll return to. But this is a kind of an overview of this article. And this is what generative AI makes me look like, right? So they can be quite fun and nice as well. But then again, don't trust your senses. So the topics most obviously relevant for today is politics and democracy and the persuasion and manipulation and human relationships part of what I discuss in this article. First then, what we sense. These systems change how we sense and what we sense and how we go about evaluating and assessing what we sense. Anyone seen that picture? Hands in the air if you've seen that picture. Yeah. 2023, and this was one of the kind of pivotal moments in this kind of the media landscape and where people realized, oh, this really kind of has changed. This technology has really come to a point where we have to change how we approach images and media and content. Because a lot of really large newspapers ran this image as if it was real and talked about this was a Balenciaga, kind of a puffy coat, this was kind of really cool, he was quite stylish, so they were discussing this as something real, something stylish, right? And then quite quickly they figured out, oh no, this was not real. So everyone had to retract it and say, sorry, we now have to kind of do some more rounds on the images we found online, right? This was not a real picture of the Pope in a new cool coat. At the same time, the day after, I think, these images, several images of Donald Trump getting arrested, for example, in a time period where that was a likely occurrence as well, occurred, and some people were also then kind of convinced that, okay, this is something real, something is happening. So people made news stories about this as well, but fewer people. So this was kind of a moment where people saw that these images now changes things. It changes how the media especially kind of has a new function and a need to kind of introduce new checks and balances related to what they publish and what they take for kind of valid and real stories. So that's quite recent in a sense. So it's just over a year, of course, but still kind of quite new. Adobe stock or other stock generating services. If I want to do a news story, I could go to this kind of stock photo services to get my stock photos. If I search for Gaza, I get these images on the top. When I hover over them, it says this is generated by AI, right? So if a kind of a reporter, for example, that's not really kind of well-versed in these technologies, they say, I need to make a new story about Gaza now. I don't have any photos I've taken myself, so I'll just get on the stock photo page and get it. And they might end up using AI-generated images from Gaza, which is not from Gaza, obviously, right? But kind of depicts some sort of reality that resembles this sort of situation, right? Which is quite kind of tricky, kind of related to kind of how does these sorts of agencies deal with the trust we have in them, their perceived legitimacy, what we can trust or not? What is their role, right? Because they have so many AI-generated images now, which is obviously much cheaper for them to sell, right? Because once they sell licenses to AI-generated images, they don't have to pay anyone. When they say sell images I've taken or other humans have taken, they have to pay. So they use these photos to train their own AI images and sell through these platforms. Or humans can make images and sell them. Then they get a little bit, of course. But still, it's problematic, I'd say, that you might run into a lot of news stories, for example, or other stories that seems quite convincing that have AI-generated images. Deepfakes in warfare, also quite new, October 23. New concerns emerging from their use around the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I don't know if you remember the deepfake of Zelensky. Luckily, it was quite kind of poor quality. You might kind of almost see it just from the screenshot, right? That it wasn't that great. But it could have been much, much greater, and I could have made a much better video quite quickly at home on my kind of stationary computer with decent hardware. He told, kind of, at the start of the invasion, they released this video where Zelensky purportedly told the citizens and armed forces to kind of lay down their arms and stop resisting, right? Which could be quite effective if it's delivered in the right way and if people perceive it as real. That would be their president saying, okay, lay down your arms, we're surrendering, right? That could potentially be kind of a very kind of interesting and strategically useful case for using these sorts of videos. So we're beyond images. We're also in the kind of video space more and more. Fully AI-generated videos have become rapidly better. Still not really, really great, but good. But deepfakes of existing videos, combination of videos, that's already at the level where we struggle a bit to use it. Another area, apps. For example, the Undress AI app close-off AI app, these sorts of things. I've also been in the news, right? Been a lot in the media where people can take a photo of, usually a girl, upload it to this app, and get a nude photo back, for example, right? AI technology, it's exciting technology, but it's obviously kind of a problematic use case, potentially. And then Taylor Swift, for example, gets online, and millions of views on X happened, and this became a really big thing related to kind of deepfake nudes of Taylor Swift, for example, on X. So that's another potential problematic use case. But as I'll return to later, one might, of course, try to see the good side of this, because what happens now when you see an image of someone naked, for example? If you see a nude photo of someone, one potential benefit here is that it's quite easy to say or assume that it was kind of a fake. So you could, of course, kind of run into this kind of positive effects of it, but the downsides and the negative effects are obviously quite clear and obvious, and potentially more, or probably more weighty than these ones. Audio is easier than video. Hitler speeches that appear to be AI-generated are getting millions of views on TikTok. And this was yesterday, right? So kind of generating audio now based on quite short clips of someone's voice is very, very easy. It's very convincing. This was last year in Britain. The Labour leader, Keir Starmer, they released an audio of him kind of yelling at some employees and being quite kind of not nice in a way. It wasn't really any really radical or dramatic stuff, but he came across quite kind of badly in this audio. And if you notice the headline, a sound clip of the Labour leader might be a deep fake, which is kind of in an NRK, kind of national broadcaster here. And also here in the UK opposition, this was a bit later, it says UK opposition leader targeted by AI-generated fake audio smear was the headline. But they do say, we're 75%-ish sure that it's fake. We don't know. We don't have the technology to really fully know whether or not this was a real audio tape or recording or not. Which is interesting, right? Because that takes us also into a place where fact checkers and media can't even know what's real or not. Which changes the role of kind of where is legitimacy, where is kind of the kind of epistemic authority, where is the ground truth if we can't really even technically uncover it. And again, the downside is obviously this can be used for attacks, this can be used to undermine people, this can be used in nefarious ways. But for politicians like Trump, for example, it's a gift, right? Because every time he's caught on tape saying something horrible, he can say, I know that's just fake, right? Because it's so easy to make fakes, and people know that it's easy to make fakes and hard to detect what's fake or not. So it really drastically changes our relationship with truth, would be the kind of main argument here, or how we assess or evaluate truth. Another aspect is who we interact with, not just what we see, but kind of regular interactions with people. In 2018, people were concerned that it's difficult to tell chatbots from humans online. It's difficult to know whether or not I'm interacting with a machine or not. It wasn't that difficult, perhaps, in 2018, but it is quite difficult today. It's quite hard to know whether or not a person or an account on X, for example, is a bot today. Bots on X worse than ever according to analysis of 1 million tweets during first Republican primary debate. There's a ton of fake agents, fake or AI kind of driven accounts that communicate with people as if they are real. Disseminating viewpoints and perspectives and opinions and content to American voters, for example, right? And it's obvious that there is this potential to use this technology for bad, to influence people, to make people think elsewise of something that they kind of have an interest in. Still, even more problematic perhaps is the next level modalities of these sorts of technologies. Google warns of search and generative AI-enhanced attacks, zero-day exploit use. And what we saw, for example, this was in 2024, a finance worker pays out $25 million after a video call, a live Zoom call with a fake person, right? Where you have if you have the sufficient hardware and technology, you can live transpose your face into a different kind of audio, right? So you can appear to be someone else online. So even if we do live meetings with people on Zoom, for example, as we do in our group meetings sometimes, we can't be really sure that these are the people we think they are. Which is again kind of an interesting challenge to our perceptions of what's real or not, and how can we assess that, and how should we go about changing our ways if we accept that that's reality. And that's something I'll return to later on, the implications of this, right? Debatten, May 28th, 2024, was about this.
Våre statsråder ulv I fåreklær som...
Yeah, we can do it very kind of quickly, if you can turn down the volume.
Våre statsråder ulv I fåreklær som forteller oss hva vi skal tro på. Og vi, folket,
had this introduction to debatten, right? Where he started as this one person talking about something that seemed very strange, and then the real Fredrik Solvang came in beside him.
Kunstig intelligens til å skape en falsk versjon av både ansiktet mitt og stemmen. Det dette som kalles en deepfake. Hører du forskjellen? Jeg tror ikke det. Jeg tror ikke engang jeg selv nødvendigvis hadde hørt eller sett forskjellen.
So this is a discussion where we kind of had with Karianne Tung, the digitalization minister, and Morten Gudvin, people from Langsikt, and I was there, and Sylvia Seres was there, to discuss kind of what does this mean.
Dette det.
Anyway, over to some of the implications then of these technologies. I don't know if any of this has been surprising to you. Maybe not, hopefully not too surprising. But still kind of thinking about what this means is potentially more interesting. So trust your senses has been a thing. It's quite natural for us. We trust not what we hear, but what we see, what we hear, what we kind of experience ourselves, largely at least. But this then turns into, what do we trust? Can we trust nothing anymore? Or is there still some way for us to kind of trust the information provided to us, to trust the information that we find when we seek new information, because we constantly have to, right? We constantly have to try to navigate the world and discover new things and evaluate it. So how do we evaluate what we come across once things change, like this? Truth, this is largely from the article that's done here, is elusive, more elusive. It has always been elusive. If we do the epistemology and ontology and these kinds of things, we could kind of do a different discussion on what truth is and whether or not objective knowledge could ever have been possible. But still, it changes things regardless of your kind of epistemological standpoint. What's true and what's fake? And there are books, good books written by really good philosophers as well, arguing, for example, that virtual reality is equally real as kind of this reality that I experience here, sitting and kind of sensing you in a way. It's just a different form, different modality of reality. Some seriously argue, right? So there's nothing really fake about virtual reality, according to some people's standpoint. If our senses and experiences is what matters, what's fake could be equally real, in a sense, a new form of real, something different, not necessarily worse. But what happens then when we can no longer distinguish the two? And what we say is that truth is relativized, in a sense. Truth becomes something largely relative. Truth is what we kind of come to think of it as. And that could be related to some problematic aspects that we can connect to democracy later on, for example. Regarding polarization, for example. If truth is something relative and subjective, something we just kind of agree on with others, that are increasingly similar to us as we navigate social media and mainly interact with people that are like us, then we might end up with a more polarized world, where groups of people have totally different worldviews and perspectives of what goes on in the world, what's fact, what's kind of this seeming ground truth. Conspiracy theories, it's much easier both to get them out there, to find other people that agree with them, but also to create material and content that supports them, that makes them more real and more convincing, right? Now we can fabricate more than the stories about conspiracies. We can actually fabricate this kind of fake reality around conspiracy theories. And then we have the alternative facts, which I'll return to shortly. So people are concerned and have been concerned about AI chatbots and their role in conspiracy theories, for example, and find that it was at least very easy to use ChatGPT to create narratives and stories that support common and kind of known conspiracy theories. And this is obviously a concern for OpenAI, for example. So things change quite rapidly in what you can and cannot produce in a platform, but it was quite easy at that point at least. But so what then if truth becomes something a bit more relative? It has always been, some would say, but regardless of whether or not this is something new, so what? One of the things then is Kellyanne Conway, the press secretary of Donald Trump, she introduced that concept of alternative facts, right? So this was something not really connected to AI, but something that goes along with AI. So I'm not saying that AI causes all of the problems I'm talking about today, but I'm saying that AI makes it worse. These new systems exacerbate these challenges that human beings, people like this, have created, I would say. So that would be my position. It's not caused by, at least not solely by, but it's made worse by, it's exacerbated by. Because what's an alternative fact, for example? That could be just my viewpoint of the world. So we have different facts, and then a fact is no longer what we used to think it was, right? If a fact can be alternative and different facts on the same phenomenon, then that concept changes a bit. Fake news, Trump's favorite phrase, right? One of the favorite things he says when he kind of denigrates mainstream media and all his opponents is that all the news that are unfavorable to him are fake news. But fake news is a real thing. It was a real thing. It was a real problem. But then weaponizing that into making everything potentially fake news and the idea that you couldn't really trust anything you see online makes it a bit more difficult. It's dangerous, you could say. This was quite recently as well, right before Taylor Swift herself said that she supported Harris. Trump posted this kind of Taylor Swifties for Trump images, right? Suggesting that Taylor Swift and her supporters supported Trump. And that was before she had made a kind of official statement on this. And that was, of course, quickly debunked as well. But as I'll return to, that kind of fact-checking and debunking comes after the initial main impact of a message, which makes fact-checking not a perfect mechanism to control disinformation and fake news. So, generative AI plays into broader societal developments, connections to polarization, conspiracy theories, alternative facts, exacerbates them. And we could also say, as I said before, the cry of fake news has a dual purpose. First of all, for Trump, it has been kind of one way to erode faith in mainstream media, but it is, of course, always a very nice excuse as well, if negative news about you can be pushed away as fake news and believed by your supporters. So this has that purpose as well, which is problematic, some might say. But what are our sources of truth and authority then, if we can't trust our senses anymore? Where do we turn? Where do we go from there? If we think that this is challenging for us, this creates a new problem for us, then we need to find a way to deal with it, right? So what do we do? And what are the sources of truth then, and authority? An authority in the sense of someone having the power to influence others because of one's commanding manner or one's recognized knowledge about something, for example, right? Being an authority on something. Who takes that role? Who becomes the arbiters of truth when we can't any longer determine it for ourselves? If we can't. And you might disagree about this, and we do a Q&A afterwards. If we can't trust our senses, where do we turn? What's our go-to then? Then what? If we agree that the problem is a problem, then what? What do we do? Can the government fix this for us? Is media the solution? Experts? Can we turn to Henrik to kind of explain everything for us, or someone else here to explain things? Will the media fix this? Or can technology fix this? Some people think technology can fix this as well, right? This is a problem caused by technology, but many people are also seeing technology as the solution to this, which is something we could continue on here. But either way, we will increasingly be outsourcing our evaluations of what we come across and discover and experience. At least when it's not direct observation, in the sense that I see you now, I talk to you now, I see the people that are here in this room with me. So the value of these sorts of interactions will perhaps change, because this is something we know to be real, as opposed to anything we see even live on Zoom and these sorts of things, right? So this changes how we navigate relationships and communicate with people as well. And we might be fine with outsourcing our evaluations, because evaluating ourselves what's true or not constantly is difficult and it's cumbersome and can be tiring. So maybe somebody welcomes this opportunity. The technological responses then, they abound. Science magazine, September 24, artificial arguments, for example, where they trained this ChatGPT agent to be a kind of anti-conspiracy theory agent, right? Someone that could argue with people and rid them of their conspiracy theories. This AI chatbot got conspiracy theorists to question their convictions, right? That's a potential good use case, one might say. So AI could be a tool against, for example, conspiracy theories. Persuasive LLMs can certainly have some beneficial effects. But it's very, very easy to see the negative effects as well. It's very, very easy to apply these systems to persuade something or someone that a conspiracy is real as well, or that something that is not real is real. So it's equally likely to be used in that manner. It's usually more profitable as well to use it in that manner, to persuade someone of something that I have an interest in you believing, rather than kind of fixing you or people. And of course, there are hallucinations, there are problems related to this technology as well. So they generate on their own fully new kind of conspiracies, if you want to. And this privacy problem relates to it hallucinating about persons, right? Inventing stories and histories and even crimes that named individuals have been kind of told to have been committed by ChatGPT, for example, which creates problems for OpenAI. What about watermarking then and traceability? This is another approach that's quite popular than in the technological approach to this sort of challenge. Can we watermark our texts, for example? Watermarking an image sounds kind of more reasonable, perhaps. It sounds easier to hide a watermark in an image or a video than in a text, for example. Do you think it's possible to watermark a text? No? Yeah. If it comes straight out of ChatGPT, at least, right? But of course, it's possible, it's very easy to rewrite text and amend it a bit and to tweak it a bit and to do a lot of things that might break the watermark as well when it comes to text. Also using different models, right? To process and further process the text of one model, for example. So this would be quite kind of a tall task to have a perfect watermarking system for texts. But there are many projects related to this. And traceability, for example. People are talking about blockchain or other sorts of kind of provenance-related technologies that allows us to kind of, every time we see an image on a media site, for example, we will have access to the provenance of this image. This was originally taken here, reused here, edited here. So you'll have this kind of lineage of all media you see online, for example. Another kind of technological approach that allows us to see where an image is from. This means then kind of outsourcing. This and having a technology to kind of deal with the history of everything we see. That might be more effective. And this is, I don't know if you is on this. This is kind of University of Bergen, at least, the Rainier project, working on technological solutions to fight disinformation. And disinformation is, of course, not just a technological problem, but as I said, it is also a problem that's exacerbated by technology. Then we have traditional responses. Media and fact-checking to the rescue, right? That's kind of, this is seen as an opportunity for media now. Okay, this changes our role a bit, right? After kind of a long period of dwindling incomes and kind of challenging landscape for traditional media, this creates also a potentially more important and new role for media as some sort of authority that we can turn to. And when we see that kind of they don't publish the kind of fake images of the Pope in this kind of funky clothes, they are kind of someone we can trust and turn to. That would be a potentially new and slightly changed and more important role for media in the future. Fact-checking is also a lot of people working on that and a lot of funding being funneled into kind of fact-checking exercises. Faktis.no, for example, is quite popular and also have very kind of large and big projects aimed at kind of youth and kind of doing this in social media, for example, as well. So this is about the curation then and vetting of information, actually making sure that what's published and what's kind of in our platform, our ecosystem, is credible and trustworthy. That means that we place trust in the authority, the institution, the media institutions. But media habits have changed, right? And everyone knows this. This is also part of the kind of the reason the media industry has struggled as well, because young people, for example, don't really get their news from VG, Aftenposten, or NRK anymore. At least many don't. So then what's the kind of real impact then of having media institutions change and be good? When people get their news from Snapchat, TikTok, and YouTube, for example, right? Then what? And also, who are reached by the fact checkers? Because that's something I said before. Once a story is out there, people form an opinion based on that, and they tend to move on, at least as it's spread in social media, for example. You might get tens of millions to see this original, sensational story, and a fraction of it might see a fact check that comes out a day to a week later. Very, very few, as opposed to those that are impacted by that initial reaction. At least if you talk about people in general, in kind of the US electorate, for example, who of them would kind of seek out the fact-checking news site to check whether or not a story is real once they encounter it on Facebook, for example. So it's not really a foolproof solution. It's not really a full spectrum solution by any means, I would say. So let's skip this one about relationships. So we'll have time for the closing parts as well and get some more time for discussion. I think that would be more fun. Just one thing about trust, not the full thing. AI reduces the need for trust in others. It's a potentially interesting idea, at least. And we say in this article, again, one of those with down here, that it does. That AI allows us to not really rely on trusting people anymore. Trust is something that's relational, something we need once we're uncertain about something and we are in somewhat vulnerable position and I have to trust someone else for whatever kind of outcome I want. And technology can reduce uncertainty and lessen dependency on other people's benevolence and integrity. And we've had polygraphs, for example, for a long time, right? So this kind of fact-checking and truth-finding technology is not new at all. But still, we have a lot of different AI-based detectors of truth, of intentions, of emotions, and these sorts of things now. And emotion recognition, for example, if you've seen the kind of, not the latest model from OpenAI, but the last one, it says that this model, that was 4.0, can kind of recognize your emotions. It can detect your emotions, as if emotions is something that's expressed externally on video, for example. And most people working on this deeply say that this is pseudoscience. You can't reliably detect emotions from a video or an image of a person, for example, right? But you get these technologies as well that might be decent in a way, that might take us some way towards kind of being able to use AI to detect whether or not you're lying, whether or not you're sincere when you talk to me, these sorts of things. So it is possible for us to use this. And we can say that the system, we can use this for our students and we can use this for everyone else, right? Instead of me having to grade an exam, I wouldn't give an exam anymore that's kind of individual, grade-based, having them write a paper. Because I know that I can't evaluate whether or not that's written by this human being that's supposed to have written it. So what would be the purpose of having that sort of evaluation with the grade? And others might fully disagree here, and I know this is a really big discussion kind of in higher education, right? But I know that I couldn't reliably detect what's AI from what's not. So why, what would be the basis then of me giving a grade based on such papers, for example? Of course, we could then turn to AI detectors, right? But there's been so many attempts, and there's always this kind of new systems that are supposed to be a bit more reliable than the last one when the new model comes, and then we kind of try to track up and kind of follow up. But they aren't reliable enough, many people feel, at least, to kind of really systematically be used in a way that kind of judges people in a sense that this would be kind of fraudulent or kind of expulsion and these kinds of consequences that would be based on this system saying that this is fake, this is AI generated, this is cheating, for example. Last thing, democracy and citizens' relations. I don't know if it's obvious, but most of what I've discussed so far to me is obviously relevant to democracy. If we accept that democracy is about me understanding and relating to the people around me, you and everyone else are my kind of co-citizens in this state. I need to kind of trust you to a certain degree. I need to understand you. I need to kind of rely on what you say and what I'm told about you and others like you, other groups of people in Norway. So this kind of getting information about people, evaluating information about people, and actually interacting with people. These are kind of core aspects of democracy, as I see it, at least. And you might disagree and say, democracy is about voting, we can continue doing that anyway. But if it's about more, if it's about knowing each other to a certain degree and actually interacting to a certain degree, and being able to reliably assess information about each other, then it changes things a bit. Real democracy is one of the places we've applied for a project aimed at exactly kind of using and kind of exploring these interactions of AI and democracy with a futures-based approach, if we get the project. So if there's anyone from here that doesn't make us get that project. But still, it's about kind of then exploring this kind of interaction between AI and democracy on different levels. How will AI systems change democracy? How will it change on different levels? The individual level, the search for and gathering and processing and creation of information. That's relevant if you think that it's important that citizens has this basic knowledge about the world and this basic competency related to both evaluating and communicating preferences and beliefs and wants and desires. AI impacts that aspect of it. Relations between groups of people, the way we associate with our fellow citizens and politicians, how we find them, how we communicate with them, and what we see and think of them. That's also impacted potentially by AI, which is important. Institutionalized form of political communication can be disrupted by this sort of not being able to tell real from fake apart. Media and voting processes, influence operations related to voting and elections, these sorts of things, obviously relevant. Engagement and involvement, policy development and implementation. And on the final part, this supernatural aspect of democracy that goes beyond Norway, but kind of the global aspects. Private power and big technology, libertarian and technocratic ideas, for example, disseminating and shaping global beliefs and ideologies, these sorts of aspects, I believe, might be interesting and relevant to this. So the idea would be kind of, can we look ahead then? Because there is evidence in parts and related to bits and pieces of what's happening when AI systems, particularly social media, for example, shapes polarization, effective versus other forms of polarization. We have some evidence, right? But with the rapid introduction of this technology, in so many new areas and for so many new groups, we shouldn't rely exclusively on what we have already been able to observe. We need to have a somewhat precautionary principle and look ahead as well, in combination with these sorts of isolated and more atomistic approaches to evidence of what has happened already. Because this changes so quickly, as we saw in the introduction, what these technologies do. Getting evidence, getting that published, getting that out there. We need to also, at the same time, look ahead and see what might this do, and how might we prevent what we think are the worst things, at least. So, what are the key determinants, then, of our future with generative AI? Kind of a popular framework says that politics, economy, social aspects, technology, environmental aspects, and law are relevant. And I haven't touched upon the environmental aspects, but that's kind of everywhere as well, right? Doing a GPT request as opposed to searching, for example, the amount of power and water it uses, and that's GPT producing text. Try making long videos, for example, right? In terms of kind of the amount of the environmental impact of these technologies. It's significant. So I won't go into this now, but just kind of saying there are ways for us to try to imagine futures where we have a continuation, for example, where we stumble along and try to kind of discover and deal with these challenges that I've talked to, or where we control these technologies much more strictly, much stronger regulation of both the technology and the dissemination of content that is AI generated, for example. It's thinkable, and you might not like the idea, but it's thinkable. Kind of human interaction increasingly valued, for example, these sorts of new forms of interacting as well. Versus seeing this as the start of a transformation, which is not necessarily a bad thing. We have progressive development in and acceptance of multimodal Gen AI, techno-solutionist approaches that might make us kind of know what's true or not, maybe. And all these sorts of XAR, so kind of the VR, AR approaches that increasingly replaces human-human interaction, for example. But this is just kind of starting to think about kind of what would we like the future to be and where would we want to go. So that was about, clock is 1, so I think it's approximately on time. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Henrik. This was really interesting and fascinating and a bit scary, I would say also. There's a lot of intriguing questions in your talk. And now we're open to other intriguing questions from the audience, and you will be here to answer them, I guess.
Yeah, or discuss them. I don't have all the answers, so I'm interested in kind of what are your thoughts about these topics as well, not just questions.
So anyone want to ask some question? Yes.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, Henrik, for a very interesting topic. My name is Hao. I work in Inventu, so I work a lot with AI-related projects, actually. Although fascinated with the technology, personally, I'm also worried about the impact of this technology. Personally, for example, when I read the news from social media, I tend to not trust it. I will wait and see what will be the real news for a few days. And that is because I have a concern about this. But not many people, maybe not all of them, have this concern. And people will be very easily misled, especially for the things that happened outside of the country. You know, you cannot really see by your eyes. So I really, it resonates a lot with my concerns of what you discussed about. And I totally agree that we can do many things to try to use this technology and let people still, while using it, but still trust or have some kind of fact check when they access to this information online. So I think I believe in technology and also regulations. And I believe that if we can implement that in technology-wise, for example, with these popular apps, when you are talking to somebody, use the social media app, it should give you information that, this person who are talking to you, they are using the deepfake technology. So you just like when you are screenshot your conversation, you will be informed that somebody is screenshot. I mean, the technology-wise, it's doable. And also regulation to enforce those technology to show what the exactly technology is behind this thing. So that's my thought. I don't know if you agree with it or if you know that we are already doing this.
Yes, I agree, and I share your concern, and I also do that same time of filtering of everything I see now that I didn't do before, right? And that's about media literacy, I think, which would be really important for educational systems and all these kinds of things. Regarding technological solutions, I'm less optimistic, perhaps. Yes, Snapchat warns you when you take a screenshot. But of course, if you take a phone and take a photo of the snap, for example, you get no warning, right? So that would mandate people to that build deep fake technologies or these kinds of image composition technologies to build that into a system that can reliably report that this is a deep fake. But this technology is so easily available, open source and from different providers, and easy to both build and compile and do at home. So I don't think we'll be able to reliably have people have this technology restricted to companies or people that will allow us to either watermark or warn people when it's a deepfake, for example. That would be in the technology, right? So when you use a deepfake, it's reported, so you get a warning. Otherwise, it would have to be detected reliably. And that's also just a cat and mouse game to me, because as we see from the text and images and all these kinds of things, it's increasingly hard. And as we saw with audio, for example, it's impossible to reliably say that this is 100% a deepfake audio if it's a variable quality audio file, for example. And as the technology evolves and is easily available and reproducible and accessible to everyone, and with good or bad intentions, I think we won't reliably all the time be able to detect these sorts of challenges. So I think we need kind of different kind of approaches as well, even if I think it's good to pursue technological approaches. But I don't think that kind of blockchain in media, for example, will fix all this forever, for example. So I think we need at least alternative approaches as well. Yeah.
Great. More questions? Yes.
Thank you for the talk. Very interesting. I was wondering about community notes in X or Twitter, right? This is a very smart mechanism to make truth of at least some tweets, where you utilize that some people who earlier disagreed now agree on that this is fake news, right? So this is a mechanism which can be used, I guess. And the other thing is like prediction markets, where you in a way use money to vet your, like you get behind your bet, right? And then you can at least, in situations where it's uncertain, what is true, you can in a way use market mechanisms to see what is the probability of that this news is real.
Yes.
Have you any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the second one, I agree that might be use cases where that could help us. Kind of in real time assessing everything we see, it might be difficult to have something in place that's kind of rapid or instantaneous enough to do that work. But community notes, I like them. And it was good on Twitter, right? I left Twitter. I'm not on X anymore. And Elon Musk doesn't like community notes, because his posts got community notes all the time, right? That he's lying about stuff. This is not true. This is not real. So the users were kind of flagging his posts as kind of something that's problematic, or at least to be challenged. So I think that's definitely a potential for those sorts of mechanisms to be effective if the platforms themselves want them and support them. And I'm kind of not really, I don't have too much faith in Elon Musk supporting that for long on X. But it might be a good thing. But you also see that kind of Meta, for example, seeing what happens at X, they kind of almost drop all their content moderation and say that, okay, this is a free-for-all now. They're the worst anyway, so we can pretty much kind of relax and be second to worst, or kind of, yeah, let this kind of be the user's responsibilities. So I think there potentially could be those sorts of solutions, but that would have to be mandated by regulation, for example. And I think the EU is going a long way in doing good things, in challenging, for example, an X in their kind of lack of moderation, content moderation. So I think the Digital Services Act, for example, by the EU is a good thing. And the AI Act is a good thing. So I think we need more of those kinds of regulations, and it will need to have a global reach, of course. And it's not popular with the big technology companies, but I think it's a good thing. I think we need more of those. And that would be, for example, those sorts of mechanisms as well.
Hi, thank you very much for a very interesting talk. I want to pick your mind on the idea of actually letting things be and letting things to find their own balance without intervening so much and putting pressure on things, just leaving them free, and in the end all those fake news will be obvious, or all misinformation will be out there and people will figure out. Yeah. What do you think of this approach?
I think that's kind of Elon Musk's approach, and that's kind of many people that support him in this kind of free speech approach, is that there is this free marketplace of ideas. So if you kind of let it, la trollet ut I solen, så sprekker det, ikke sant? Also just if you let things kind of out in the sunshine, it'll be clear what's true or not. That's a kind of basic idea. And I used to be kind of a political philosopher with a very kind of libertarian professor, so I'm very kind of well versed in this kinds of ideas, liberal ideas about freedom of speech and John Stuart Mill, and this kind of let everything out there, and the market and the kind of free exchange will sort things out, what's true or not. And yes, in theory, I like that idea, but when you see mass societies and social media and how we get different sort of communities getting exposed to different ideas, not each other's ideas, and not able to or willing to interact with each other and expose things, it's impossible in that sort of large mass-scale communication networks. We don't get those mechanisms. We instead get this kind of epistemic bubbles, as people see, where we have our own truths and we interact with people like ourselves. Because that's what we are as humans. We enjoy people like us. We enjoy not being challenged too much. When I go into a commentary field in a newspaper, for example, I do that once a month by accident, for example. I kind of get horrified at, is this my fellow citizens, right? I kind of hate going there and seeing those kinds of things, kind of intuitively, instinctively. It's not something I enjoy. So thinking that people will go in and engage with those that are so different from them and kind of find some truth through effective markets of ideas, I don't really have faith in that happening at that scale. So pessimistic, perhaps, about kind of that solution.
I just want to ask, what is your opinion on the costs of the computational cost in terms of money that you have to put to create something that is really resembles something that is real? I mean, we can do that for photos, we can do that for text, whether we will be able to do that for films, for more complex stuff, perhaps for a short film. What will be the cost? Whether this is a border of everything, right, for the AI development?
Yeah. I agree, and that's a really important part of it. That connects with environmental impact as well, right? It could be less out of environmental concern, but there's concern, do we have the computational resources we need? Do we use the computational resources for that instead of Earth system modeling, for example? Those kind of alternative costs that could be more interesting. But I think what the big tech companies have been betting on is that this will become kind of solve itself through kind of increased computational resources and efficiency. So using OpenAI systems now, for example, is ridiculously cheap through the API system, for example, as compared to what it should be. When you run your own pods or AI systems, for example, it's kind of crazy expensive as opposed to kind of running this through the systems. Microsoft and everyone is gearing up now to try to solve this, right? So Microsoft is hiring nuclear engineers because they need kind of power for their systems. NVIDIA is soaring, right, because everyone wants their GPUs. So I think people are seeing this as kind of something that will inevitably grow and become robust enough to provide us with what we need. And I think it's really problematic. And I think we shouldn't kind of want to or encourage the growth, further growth of uncritical use of these sorts of technologies, because I think there are many reasons for it, both because it could be used for better things, but also because I don't think kind of that sort of growth in the computational and data center infrastructure is a good thing for us. And I don't think the use cases are positive enough to warrant it either. So I think it's definitely kind of a challenge and a problem. And I would fully support kind of more restrictions or kind of more taxes, if you want, or some kind of mechanism that makes it more expensive to kind of waste computational resources as all other resources.
All right.
Last one.
One more question.
Sorry. I'm just wondering if we can get some help from history, because sort of fake news is nothing new, actually. Mm-hmm. The technology to produce them is new, but if you think back sort of 500 years ago, or 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, right, when printing was invented, mm-hmm. right, there was also a surge of sort of fake, and so right, it could be interesting to see, right, how right, people in history have been sort of solving this problem, right? Yes. Because we've got all these conspiracies, they've existed, right, as long as mankind has existed. So the technology is new, right? So it's the way to produce it is new, but right, the matter is new.
I agree. The core problem, or kind of core of the problem, is old. But I think it's somewhat new once we kind of can't trust what we see and hear as opposed to what we read, which reading is something we kind of get conveyed, and we know that this is the kind of story or representation of someone through kind of indirect means as opposed to direct means. So that's one potential difference. I also think the scale of things today in social media and the way things spread and the ways our societies are more complex and larger and different in a sense changes things and the dynamics and the speed of it a bit as well. But I totally agree. We should look to history. What has kind of secret services done in terms of kind of making fakes images, for example, for destabilizing political communities? But also Harari writes about this in a new book, right, Nexus. So he writes about kind of what happened when they got the printing press. Well, the first bestseller was a book about witches, right? How to hunt them effectively. So yes, it's not a totally new phenomenon. I totally agree. So looking to history and looking back is certainly interesting, but I think there is something, not just quantitatively, but also at least slightly qualitatively different about these sorts of technologies. But certainly not, the linkage to history is strong enough for us to really look seriously into it. Yes?
Okay, thank you very much. We were very happy to have you physically here and not just a video that might have been
fake.
Artificially, but so we believe that this was you actually performing this.
Good.
Still.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I'll just want to mention that there will be the next, is it the next week actually? Yeah, there will be another lunch. Then we will be joined by Duncan Watts from the Institutt of Theoretical Astrophysics in the dScience launch, and he will give a talk called Mapping the Universe from the Big Bang to the Solar System. And you can find the full program in our website. So, feel free to grab some food. I believe there's still some food there. At least that's in my manuscript. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you.